Live from Atlanta, Georgia, it's the Zach Ballinger Show, where we help you find your direction through passion and purpose. My name is Zach Ballinger. I am your host. Thank you guys so much for joining the show today. We really do have a special guest. Before we get started, we are streaming via YouTube, so you're welcome to ask questions during the YouTube broadcast. Or you can always email those questions to me at zach@zachballinger.com, and we'll ask them to our guest today. Without further ado, without all the technical difficulties, Robert, thank you so much for joining the show today.
That's my pleasure.
So, Robert, I just want to jump right in. What is exactly you do for your career? What did you used to do? All that good stuff.
My career started many years ago, too many years ago. I've always been involved in one way with either law enforcement or security. I, I'm a lifelong New Yorker, but just for those couple of years, I was assigned out in California near the Mexican border. So after a couple of years out there, I came back and I did the bulk of my career then in the police department in New York. And instead of just saying NYPD, I started with the transit police. A lot of people don't realize that for many years there were three separate police departments operating within New York City. There was the transit police that had jurisdiction over the subway system. There was the housing police that worked in the city public housing projects. And then, of course, everybody knows about the NYPD. So I started with the transit police, but then way back in 1995, the departments merged into one. So everybody who was a part of the transit police and the housing police then became part of the New York City Police Department. I went from becoming part of the transit police to a member of the Transit Bureau of the NYPD.
Gotcha. And so, you started off really in law enforcement. Now, did you go to the academy or anything like that, or how does all that work?
Yeah, the original with the Border Patrol, I spent 4 months in the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, which at that time, I know the Border Patrol doesn't train there anymore, but at that time, they went to FLETC, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, which is in Glencoe, Georgia. So I spent 4 months there going through a very rigorous academy where, besides the physical aspects of it, the very unique aspect of the Border Patrol Academy was that you had to become at least semi fluent in Spanish. So there was a crash Spanish course, nothing like you'd find in high school, that had to be passed along with the other normal law enforcement physical, firearms, tactical type of subjects.
Now, when you grew up, did you always grow up wanting to be a police officer, or how did you? I know you started on the border, but how did you originally? What was your interest in that?
Pretty much so. I think it was more, and this is not a very good statement to make, but it's probably lack of interest in other things as opposed to, this burning desire for law enforcement. I didn't have any family members or friends that had been in the police, but one thing that I did have drilled into me, my father was a very big proponent of the civil service system. He had been a high school dropout who went to sea as a merchant marine at the age of 16. He then was drafted into the army, served in Korea, so he ended up coming back to New York with no education and no job really, and even with a lack of a high school degree, he was able to pass a civil service test and meet the qualifications for a stationary fireman, and had a long and very good career in the city, working his way up to stationary engineer. So he was always espousing the virtues of the civil service system, where he'd always say, you'll never get rich, but you'll never go hungry. So that's how myself and my sister were really brought up, talking about how, even though he wanted us to go to college, he also was telling me to take every civil service test possible as soon as I possibly could. So I did. I started taking, police tests, and actually the Border Patrol test was the first one that actually I got called to take for the job.
And so, it says here you're a retired police captain for the NYPD, correct?
Correct.
And so, how many years did you do that particular role?
I was a captain for a little over 4 years before I retired from the rank of captain.
And then you retired on, and then you have a new career now, correct? What is it exactly you do now?
Well, I do a couple of things now. I'm still working full time. I'm in my office right now. I'm the chief security officer at a New York State government facility where I'm responsible for the physical security of the site. And I also have been for the past over now close to 5 years. I've authored several books on my career, on law enforcement in general, and some mysteries and thrillers also.
And so, what did you like most about, really your career? If you think about it, it's security, it's law enforcement. You've kind of been the civil servant. What are you passionate about? What's your favorite thing about it?
Uh, I liked being, it sounds corny, but I liked being one of the good guys in that I think, and I'll tell you, nowadays, it's kind of sad to see the way that society is kind of flipped. But I always looked at, and I still look at police, all of the first responders as being the good guys in society. They're out there to help. They're not out there to hurt people. Of course, there's rotten apples in any basket, but I always liked being one of the good guys that was out there to make things better.
And I got to imagine that this job is pretty taxing as a NYPD captain. I mean, I'm sure you've seen a lot of stuff in your career, just even from your time back from the border enforcement. What's some of the things that you don't like about your job, or some of the things? Let's say I'm a high school student out there and I'm listening to Robert. What's some of the difficulties if I want to be a police officer?
Well, one of the difficulties in being a police officer, this is one thing that I always have told young people. It has nothing to do first with the job itself. It has to do with avoiding the disappointment when you want the job. All of I've known a lot of young people who had these ambitions from the time they could walk to be police officers, but they did not educate themselves on the qualifications. And what I mean specifically is there are always going to be certain medical and physical qualifications to most of these law enforcement jobs. And as great as the ambition is to perform this role, you have to also do a good self analysis and say that if you suffer from some type of an ailment that is going to be disqualifying, your vision is not up to the qualifications, the requirements, and it's not correctable. You've got some type of back problem that is going to be disqualifying, that's not correctable. You're only setting yourself up for a big disappointment if you keep going forward trying to get into this career only when you know you're not going to be able to pass the medical and the physical requirements. So just understanding the reality of 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 what it takes to qualify for a job, I think is the primary thing that is the starting point.
Awesome. Great advice. And you come from it from so many different angles. So I feel like I could interview you all day, but right now your job is a chief security officer, correct? Is that
Correct.
so? Let's say somebody's out there and they're interested in that type role. Do you typically have to have a lot of experience? How do you get to be what you're doing today?
Private security is a very diverse and different type of business nowadays. It ranges from your entry level minimum wage type of work all the way up to some very high paying positions. There's experience, as within any occupation, is very important. Uh, I have a staff here that's of about 70 armed security officers. Probably, I want to say now 90% of them are retired law enforcement. So they bring a certain skill level and qualification to the table. Um, that's this site. There are many, especially unarmed positions where, uh, again, they're entry level. The thing I would caution with that is that that's another area where, people looking to get into this field, they have to do their homework on this. I think just about every state now has some type of licensing requirements for private security. There might still be a couple that don't. Like for instance, in New York, there's a specific path you have to take. There's a pre-assignment course that has to be taken from a certified school. Then there's a 16-hour on-the-job training course. You have to take an annual in-service class every year. So these are things that if you're going to be competitive in the game, you have to go and get yourself licensed in the proper way. So that's the first thing that anybody who's looking to do is get yourself to where you're in the playing field. You have the license that you need to proceed in this occupation.
It's almost like being a nurse. If you want to be a registered nurse, there are certain things you have to do. There's certain education levels, there's certain tests you have to take, there's certain boards that you have to certify. Almost like that. You have to really do your homework, find out what your state, because like you said, all 50 states are different with their regulations and requirements. So first of all, the student needs to probably figure out, do some homework and to see what all exactly is entailed in order to even become a private officer.
Correct.
Let's go back to the NYPD captain. I think that's fascinating. So what did the rank look like? I mean, for us out there that doesn't know a lot about the police force, did you talked about the border security, but then you started off, I guess, as a regular police officer in the transit. What's the career development path? How did you get to a captain?
The career development path, it can be, from my understanding and my experience of just dealing with other departments, there can be some differences, but a lot of it is like New York, where it's civil service, in that there's an expression, it's a very cynical expression, but it's captains have had 3 lucky Saturdays, because the promotion to sergeant, lieutenant, and captain is all via a civil service promotional test. And the tests are always given on a Saturday morning. So the cynic says that a captain may have absolutely no leadership skills, but they were able to get lucky on 3 Saturday mornings. Now, there may be something to be said for that, but on the other hand, I do feel it is a very fair system, because everybody is on that level playing field where when you come into the job that you can advance to the rank of captain by passing these tests, that everybody has the same ability to study the same materials and perform to their best of their abilities on these exams. So there's no politicking involved. There's no backdoor politics, taking place. So I think ultimately it may not be a complete measure of a person's ability to manage and lead, but it is an inherently fair system.
Is it aptitude tests or physical tests, or what does it kind of entail?
No, it's content based in that the let's say the Bible for the NYPD is the patrol guide. It's a very, very large manual of every different procedure that could ever happen, and that, along with an administrative guide, is what is used. And the idea is it's almost impossible to be able to memorize a book or books like that. But again, if with test taking ability, knowing from the announcement of the exam what they're telling you to focus on, and then putting in the time. I mean, every time I was getting ready to take an exam, I literally took many months of every day just hitting the books, in order to perform well. And I still found these exams difficult.
And so let's say you're a student out there, a lot of our childhood dreams, I think, you think about, mommy, I want to be a doctor, or I want to be a police officer. Nowadays it's a very tough job. Everybody realizes that. Well, what if you kind of gave some advice of what a student needs to do before they proceed into that job, but if they're thinking about it right now as a high school senior, what should they do to get some experience to see if this is a job that they want to really go into?
Well, I can speak from New York City, and a lot of other towns and cities throughout the country have these type of programs. There are law enforcement explorer programs where you can check with your local department, and they specifically cater to high school students who are going to volunteer a certain amount of hours a month, and they're going to partake in certain activities under the jurisdiction of a police officer who's assigned to give them certain experiences, not obviously not to put them in any dangerous situations, but they also do community service, and it just gives them a little bit of a feel for it. Also, there is the cadet program. Many agencies have that. The NYPD has that, and the beauty of the cadet program is someone who is accepted into the cadet program. They stay in that program for several years, where they are going to school and they are working several hours a week in the cadet program. And then when they finish school, because again, that's understanding the requirements. With the NYPD, there's a minimum of 2 years of college. But when they finish their school, they're on a preferred list to go right into the NYPD, bypassing the open competitive civil service. So again, there's different ways like that. There's auxiliary police or strictly volunteers where they can volunteer at their local precinct, and again, at least get a little bit of a feel for what it's like to be a part of the job.
Good advice. I love it. So, we did want to get some of the questions that came in for you, and some of these you may not know, and some of them you may know may be real relevant today. But someone writes in that they want to be a sheriff eventually. That's their goal. What does that look like? I really have no idea what they mean. Maybe could you walk us through what their sheriff's a political office, isn't it? Don't they have to run?
Yeah, I think probably what your questioner means here is you're absolutely right. A sheriff in any jurisdiction I know, the actual sheriff is an elected position, has to run for it. But many departments are called the sheriff's office, and they serve dual functions. They actually have deputy sheriffs that are performing regular police patrol duties, but in many of these sheriff's offices, they also perform the correctional duties. So somebody who is working like right now in New York City, there's a specific Department of Corrections. But in a lot of jurisdictions, the sheriff's office handles the police patrol function and the correctional function. So deputy sheriffs can also function as correction officers.
Gotcha. And someone writes in that they think they want to go into law enforcement as a career. Do you recommend that? Looks like they're thinking about going into the military first. Would that be a good career progression for that individual?
Sure, military always would help just the environment and the discipline, because the no matter how you cut it, police departments are still considered paramilitary organizations. There's a level of drill and a level of discipline that has to go along with the job that in some way mirrors the military life. So yeah, where you may not get a specific uh, aid to that, although in New York City though now they do military veterans do get a preference in there. So it does, and I'm sure it's not the only jurisdiction. So there's a preference that can be given with that, but just the experience would be very very positive for a law enforcement career.
And I don't know if you can answer this, but a question came in. What's one of the worst things you've had to deal with being an NYPD officer or a captain?
Well, the worst thing that I think any cop in any rank has to deal with is the idea of death taking place. I mean, you see, cops tend to, one of the bad parts about the job is cops tend to see people at their worst. Uh, they see people, when 24 hours later they're fine, they're not under the influence of alcohol, drugs, rage, fear. But dealing with a person who either you have to notify them that they've just lost a loved one, or you have to be with them to try to console them, and still not personalize it, because that's where police officers have to be very careful. It's a great job, but there's a lot of negative things that a cop experiences, and if you personalize all of it, uh, you you will go crazy. I remember many years ago on a Christmas day, I had to go underneath a subway train to try to assist someone that just had their legs cut off. And several hours later, I'm sitting around the Christmas tree with my family, opening presents. It's a hard thing to separate, but you have to do it if you're going to maintain your sanity.
Wow. And someone writes in, have you, I don't know if you can answer this again, but have you had to fire a weapon before?
No, I'm like the overwhelming majority of police officers in this country who never, except at a range, I never fired my firearm in the line of duty.
Yep, and I think that's a misconception, right? I mean, if
But
you ask the normal person on they probably like, okay, when did you fire your weapon? But like you said, statistically, most officers don't ever
right,
fire
no,
their weapon.
no, it's like something like 96% of cops never fire in the line of duty.
And is the captain? Someone writes in when they see the New York police on TV. Is the captain's the one wearing the white uniform?
That is correct. You'd have captains, and then above that, you'd have deputy inspectors, deputy chiefs, assistant chiefs, all of the senior managements in the white shirts. Yes.
And so the white shirts, so the blue shirts can't do any like when we're watching this on TV and we see like riots or something break out, the white they have to get permission to do anything from where that captain's over those police officers, correct?
They should be the ones that are actually running the show there. Yes.
Gotcha. And then where can people find your books? Let's say, is your books more nonfiction or they fiction or what do they entail?
I have both. I have nonfiction in that I have a series called Dark Nights that's now up to Dark Knight 6 that pretty much chronicles aspects of my career, but I did it from a little bit of a different slant, and then that's why I call it the name Dark Knights, because there's not a lot of cops and robbers and heroic actions in there. I think that, and it's because it's a defense mechanism because of the nature of the job, that I think some of the funniest people on the planet are police officers, and the cop sense of humor. Some people can find it sometimes very dark, sometimes very morbid, but I think sometimes some of the things that happen are absolutely hysterical. So, Dark Nights is basically talking about the dark humor that is found within the police career, and specifically, it highlights instances within my career. Now, besides the Dark Nights series, I've also done some fiction. I've started a series called Hairbag Nation. That's fiction where a lot of people have not. I believe hairbag is probably a New York term, although I'm not sure. Maybe other parts of the country think it's their term too. But hairbag is kind of an expression that cops use for kind of an old grizzled veteran. It's not a complimentary term either. It's kind of like somebody that's out there just trying to avoid getting involved in anything. And so I have a funny fictional series started called Hairbag Nation, and I've also done, again, some mysteries, some thrillers, and I've done some nonfiction in that I've done a book on crime prevention that's called simply Crime. Talks about crime prevention at a personal level. And I've done an active shooter awareness book. Talks about, whether you are somebody that's in, let's say, a security setting, or whether you're just somebody that's looking to protect your family when you're out, if we ever get out again in a group, or, as to, things to look for and how to survive in, God forbid, one of these awful events occurs.
So we'll make sure to link in them if anybody's interested in grabbing your books. We'll make sure to get those links from you via email. But Robert, thank you so much for your time. I know you're really busy. You're actually at work right now, so I hate to bother you. But this has been fascinating. I think this is going to help a lot of my audience that are either thinking about getting into law enforcement or thinking about getting in that security realm. You really did a great job of kind of outlining your career and relating that back to them. So we do appreciate your time today.
My pleasure, Zach. Thank you for having me.
All right, Robert, have a great day and take care and have a great week.
You too. Thank you.